Tornvale had learned long ago that silence in space was never truly silent. It hummed through his boots, through the patched plating of his suit, through the old salvage cutter that clung to the wreck like a stubborn parasite. The dead world below filled half his visor, a cracked marble of gray and rust, its atmosphere long since stolen by time or war. Orbiting it was the graveyard, hundreds of shattered ships frozen in slow, drifting arguments about whose fault it had been. He nudged himself forward with a short burst from his thrusters and muttered, "All right, you magnificent pile of scrap. Let's see what secrets you forgot to die with." The cruiser's hull was split open like a rib cage, metal peeled back and scorched. Torrin slipped inside, boots clanging softly, and immediately regretted not charging his suit heater. Space was cold, yes, but old ships were colder. The kind of cold that made joints ache and thoughts move slower, like they needed permission. He was halfway through slicing open a sealed maintenance door when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the ship. Footsteps, careful ones. Torrin froze, cutter winding down. "If you're a hallucination," he said into the darkness, "you're late. I already talked to myself today." A figure drifted into view from the opposite corridor, light reflecting off a plain suit that was clean in a way most scavenger gear wasn't. The woman stopped when she saw him, hands visible, posture relaxed. Her helmet was transparent, revealing a calm face, light skin, pale blonde hair pulled back tight, and long ears that curved gently past her hairline, unmistakably alien, yet oddly elegant. "I could say the same," she replied. "If you're here to steal my find, you're early." Torrin blinked once, then twice. "Right. Talking hallucinations now. That's new." She smiled faintly. "I'm real. Unfortunately." "Well, that makes two of us." He gestured with the cutter. "Scavenger code says first one inside gets priority. I was here first by at least, let's say, destiny." "I was mapping this wreck 2 hours ago," she said. "Survey work." "Surveyor?" Torrin eyed her suit again. "You picked a terrible neighborhood." She shrugged. "I like quiet places." He laughed, the sound echoing oddly in the corridor. "Then you chose wrong. These ships groan when you cut them open, like they're offended." She introduced herself as Liz. The name slid easily into the space between them, unassuming. They agreed after a brief and deeply unheroic argument involving a floating wrench to work together. Mostly because neither of them wanted to get spaced alone if the hull shifted. They moved deeper into the wreck, trading tools, complaints, and occasional jokes about whose fault it would be if the reactor decided to wake up angry. Torrin talked as he worked. It helped him focus. He complained about the station fees, about how nav cores were always hidden behind the sharpest edges, about how the universe clearly had a sense of humor and used it poorly. Liz listened. Sometimes she laughed at exactly the right moment, which unsettled him more than silence would have. She asked questions about salvage routes, about how he learned to read ship layouts, about why he never worked with a crew. He answered without thinking much about it, too busy threading a cable through a nest of ancient wiring. At one point, gravity stuttered. Torrin flailed, collided gently with a wall, and spun once before grabbing a handhold. "If I die," he said breathless, "tell people it was heroic, not interpretive dancing." Liz laughed, a genuine sound, and something in her expression softened, as if she'd forgotten herself for a moment. They found the nav core sealed behind a collapsed bulkhead, humming faintly, stubbornly alive. Torrin grinned inside his helmet. "You beautiful, credit-shaped miracle." As he began the careful work of extraction, he became aware of a strange feeling. Not danger, not fear, but the sense that this ordinary day in this forgotten place was quietly stepping off the path it was supposed to follow. He ignored it. Feelings like that didn't pay docking fees. Behind him, Liz watched in silence, her long ears angled slightly forward, her gaze distant for a heartbeat too long, as if she were already measuring the distance between who she was here and who she would have to be once she left. The wreck had moods. Torrin was certain of it now. As soon as they moved past the command deck, the corridors narrowed and twisted, as if the ship were deliberately trying to make them uncomfortable. Loose panels drifted like lazy predators, and every few minutes something deep in the hull clicked or sighed, reminding them that old machines never truly forgot their purpose. Torin pushed himself along a handrail and glanced back at Liz. If this thing suddenly turns the lights on and asks for a password, I'm blaming you. That seems unfair, she said mildly. I didn't build it. Neither did I, but experience says the universe doesn't care about fairness. They worked in a strange rhythm. Torin took the front, cutting, prying, and occasionally swearing when metal behaved like metal. Liz followed, steady and precise, securing cables and stabilizing debris with a competence that made him stop commenting on it. He noticed things anyway. The way she moved without wasted motion. The way she read old control glyphs faster than most scavengers could. He filed it away under interesting but not my problem. At one point, a cluster of dormant defense drones drifted into view, spherical and bristling with long-dead weapon ports. Torin froze. Okay, he whispered. Nobody breathe. I know they don't have lungs, but still. They're inactive, Liz said, scanning them. Power cells are drained. See, that's what everyone says right before they aren't. He floated forward carefully, nudging one drone aside with a tool. It spun lazily, bumped another, and nothing happened. Torin exhaled. I accept your reality, for now. They squeezed through a collapsed access tube and emerged into what had once been crew quarters. Personal items still floated there. A cracked data slate, a child's gravity toy, a boot with the sole half melted. Torin slowed despite himself. Salvage usually meant engines and cores, things that never felt human. This did. Liz drifted closer to a small locker, her fingers brushing a faded insignia. For a moment her expression tightened, then smoothed out again. Did you ever want to be anything else? She asked suddenly. Torin snorted. Rich? She smiled and then shook her head. I mean before this. Before this, I was younger and worse at this, he said. People talk about destiny like it's a plan. Mostly it's just momentum. You fall into something and get good enough that leaving feels expensive. She considered that in silence. So you never kneeled for anyone? Once, Torin said. Dropped a bolt. Took me 5 minutes to find it. That earned him a quiet laugh. The sound echoed oddly in the small space. Warmer than the cold ship deserved. The gravity cut again. Harder this time. Both of them spun as the wreck adjusted, a long groan vibrating through the hull. Torin collided gently with Liz, their suits bumping together. He grabbed a rail with one hand and steadied her with the other. Sorry, he said. I usually buy someone dinner first. I'll survive, she replied, though her pulse was a little fast. They moved on. Deeper, older. The ship's systems grew more archaic, interfaces layered with overrides and forgotten redundancies. When Torin struggled with a sealed hatch, Liz stepped forward and rerouted the panel with a quick series of inputs. The door slid open obediently. Torin stared. Surveyors do that now? Professional curiosity, she said lightly. He raised an eyebrow inside his helmet but said nothing. He'd learned that people who didn't want to explain things rarely did, and pushing only made them better liars. They found the nav core chamber at last, nestled like a heart behind layers of armor. It pulsed faintly, stubbornly alive, a relic refusing to accept irrelevance. Torin felt a thrill despite himself. This was why he did it, the moment when dead things proved useful again. As he anchored himself and began the extraction, Liz watched, arms folded, her long ears angled forward. Torin talked through the process, half habit, half distraction. He joked about selling it for a palace, about retiring somewhere with real gravity and bad weather. Would you like that? She asked. Bad weather? He grinned. At least rain hits you honestly. The core came free with a soft hum. Torin secured it and let out a breath. Well, he said, that's a small miracle. Outside the wreck, distant engines rumbled. Too deep, too steady to belong to scavenger traffic. Torin didn't notice yet. He was too busy thinking that this job had gone unusually well, and that was usually when the universe leaned in close and corrected him. By the time they disengaged from the wreck, Torin's shoulders ached in that satisfying way that meant the work had been real and the reward tangible. The nav core was locked into a mag cradle between them, glowing softly like it was pleased to still be relevant. He guided them back through the fractured corridors, careful not to snag the core on jagged metal or his own optimism, which had a habit of catching on things. "Try not to drop that," Liz said as they drifted through the breach in the hull. Torrin snorted. "I've dropped worse. Once lost a whole engine because I sneezed." "I find that hard to believe." So did the insurance officer. They pushed off into open space. The salvage station hung nearby, an ungainly wheel of docking arms and mismatched modules, patched together over decades by people who valued function over dignity. Its running lights blinked like tired eyes. Torrin felt a familiar sense of relief wash over him. Stations meant air without filters whining in his ears, gravity that mostly worked, and vendors who pretended not to know where things came from. As they drifted closer, he noticed traffic congestion around the far side of the station. Unusual, scavenger lanes were usually clear, especially this deep in forgotten orbit. "Huh," he muttered. "That's new." Liz was very quiet beside him. They docked without incident, mag locks clamping down with a reassuring thud. Inside the station's airlock, Torrin cycled out of his suit, stretching as gravity asserted itself with all the subtlety of a personal grudge. Liz removed her helmet more slowly. Her expression had changed. Not fear, not panic, but a kind of focused stillness that made him think of a blade before it was drawn. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Just adjusting." He shrugged. "Station gravity does that. Give it a minute and you'll feel like you've always belonged here." They made their way through the docking corridor, passing the usual assortment of station life, mechanics arguing over a broken loader, a pair of traders loudly pretending not to recognize each other, a child chasing a hovering maintenance drone while its owner apologized to everyone. Torrin waved at a vendor he knew and flashed the nav core's containment seal just enough to earn a low whistle. "Nice pull," the vendor mouthed. Torrin grinned back. He was already counting credits in his head, subtracting fees, adding repairs, subtracting fees again, and wondering if he could finally replace the bunk padding that smelled faintly of old coolant and regret. They reached the salvage exchange office just as the station lights flickered. Torrin frowned. That's never a good sign. Before he could finish the thought, the entire corridor vibrated. A deep, resonant hum rolled through the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy docking clamps engaging somewhere very close. The chatter around them died. Then the armored soldiers arrived. They poured out of the adjacent docking bay in perfect formation, boots striking the deck in precise rhythm. Their armor was polished and marked with insignia Torrin recognized instantly. The kind you didn't see unless you were very important or very unfortunate. Conversation stopped. People pressed themselves against bulkheads. Even the vendors went quiet. Torrin leaned toward Liz. "So, funny story. If they're here for parking violations, we might be in trouble." She didn't answer. The soldiers advanced, then stopped as one. Without a word, every single one dropped to one knee. Torrin's brain stalled, not slowed, stalled, like a machine encountering a problem it had never been designed to process. He followed their line of sight. Liz stood there, hands at her sides, shoulders squared. Something about her had changed. Not her face, not her clothes, but the way she occupied space. The easy looseness he'd known folded away, replaced by a presence that made the air feel ordered. She inhaled, slow and steady. "Rise," she said. Her voice was calm, resonant, and unmistakably commanding. The soldiers obeyed instantly. Torrin stared. "Huh," he said faintly. "I knew surveyors were underpaid, but this feels excessive." Liz turned to him. Queen Elisara turned to him. Her long ears were held high now, her expression composed, eyes sharp with intelligence, and something older than the station itself. "Torrin Vale," she said, and hearing his name spoken like that sent a chill through him. "Thank you for your assistance." He looked around at the kneeling soldiers, the stunned onlookers, the nav core humming quietly between them. "I'm going to need you to say that again," he said, "but maybe start with the part where you explain why everyone else is suddenly furniture." A flicker of something almost like amusement crossed her face before duty reclaimed it. "I am Queen Elisara of the Aurelian Reach. I left the palace without escort 3 days ago." Torrin nodded slowly. "Of course you did. The station's commander hurried forward, bowing so deeply Torin worried for his spine. Aelisura acknowledged him with a brief gesture, then looked back at Torin, the only one still standing upright, mostly because his legs refused to accept new instructions. "You treated me as an equal," she said quietly, for him alone. "That matters more than you know." He scratched his head. "Well, I would have complained less if I'd known." For a heartbeat, the Queen almost laughed. The docking bay no longer felt like a place built for cargo. It felt like a stage no one had rehearsed for, and Torin was standing in the wrong spotlight. Soldiers lined the bay in disciplined silence, their armor reflecting the harsh station lights. Every movement they made was deliberate, controlled, as if chaos were something that happened to other people in less important rooms. Aelisura spoke with the station commander in low tones, issuing instructions that carried without effort. Ships were to clear approach lanes. Communications were to be sealed. No one was to transmit anything beyond the station until her escort departed. The words were precise, efficient, and frighteningly final. Torin watched her and felt an uncomfortable realization settle in his chest. This was not a role she was stepping into. This was what she had stepped out of. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware that he was still holding the nav core like a forgotten prop. A nearby officer glanced at it, then at him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Careful," Torin muttered to the core. "Apparently you're royal adjacent now." Aelisura turned back toward him. The space between them felt different under the gaze of her guard. Heavier, charged with expectations he had no intention of meeting. She approached until they were close enough that he could see the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. The remnants of the woman who had drifted through wreckage and laughed at bad jokes. "You should hand that over," she said gently. Torin looked down at the core, then back up. "Right. Because stealing from a queen seems like a poor career move." He passed it to an awaiting officer, who accepted it as though it might explode out of sheer disrespect. The officer retreated, leaving Torin once again with nothing to do but stand there and exist incorrectly. The station commander cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we have prepared a secure route back to your flagship. Medical staff are standing by if—" "I am unharmed," Aelisura said, "but I will take a moment." The commander bowed and withdrew, practically tripping over his own urgency. The soldiers remained, impassive statues in polished armor. Aelisura looked at Torin, really looked at him. "Walk with me," she said. He glanced at the soldiers. "Is this the part where they arrest me for unauthorized queen handling?" A corner of her mouth lifted. "No. If that were the case, you would already be unconscious. Good to know where I stand." They moved toward the far end of the bay, where the noise softened and the crowd thinned. No one dared follow too closely. Torin felt dozens of eyes on his back and resisted the urge to wave. "You vanished," he said, because his brain had decided small talk was the correct response to this situation. That must have caused problems. "It caused panic," she replied, "and arguments, and several people attempting to become indispensable while I was absent." "Let me guess," Torin said. "They all failed." "Spectacularly." There was a trace of dry humor in her voice. "That was part of the point." He studied her as they walked. The queen moved with an ease that suggested she knew exactly how much space she was allowed to take and refused to take less. Yet there was tension there, too, tightly controlled, like a ship running hot just below warning levels. "So," he said, "you just decided to disappear?" "I decided to breathe," she corrected, "to be spoken to without ceremony, to work without being watched, to remember what it felt like to be useful rather than obeyed." Torin huffed a laugh. "You could have just become a scavenger full-time. We complain a lot, but it's honest." "I noticed," she said. "You complain even when nothing is wrong. It's preventative." They stopped near the airlock that led to the royal cruiser, its hull visible through the bay's transparent shielding. Sleek, immaculate, utterly unlike Torin's ship, which resembled an argument that had lost. Aelisura faced him. "You never asked who I was," she said. "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd say," he replied. "People usually do." "And now?" He shrugged. "Now I know. Doesn't really change that you still owe me half a nav core's worth of work." She laughed then, quietly, quickly, as if catching herself. The sound startled a nearby guard, who pretended not to notice. You treated me as if I were no one special, she said. That is rarer than loyalty. Torrin scratched at his jaw. If it helps, I treat everyone that way. Her expression softened, then steadied. Duty pressed back in around her like closing doors. I must return, she said. Yeah, Torrin said. Empires tend to notice when their queen goes missing. She paused at the airlock, then looked back at him. For a moment, just a moment, Liz was there again, standing in the wreckage with grease on her gloves and laughter in her voice. Thank you, Torrin Vale, she said, for seeing me. He gave a crooked smile. Anytime, Your Majesty. Try not to disappear into scrap again. The airlock sealed. The cruiser's engines began to hum. Torrin stood alone in the docking bay, surrounded by people who would never believe him, thinking that the universe had an odd sense of humor, and that for once, he didn't entirely mind being the punchline. The station did not return to normal all at once. It crept back into noise and motion the way a cautious animal returns after a shock. Slowly, suspiciously, pretending nothing had happened while absolutely remembering everything. Conversations restarted in fragments. Vendors began shouting again, a little louder than necessary. Somewhere, a machine resumed beeping with the quiet confidence of something that had never cared about royalty. Torrin watched the royal cruiser detach from the docking clamps. Its engines glowed a restrained blue, elegant and powerful, the kind of ship that had never known the indignity of a bad landing. As it slid away from the station, he felt something tug at him. Not regret exactly, but the strange sensation of having brushed against a different gravity well and escaped before being pulled in. Well, he muttered, that's going to ruin my reputation. Someone cleared their throat behind him. Torrin turned to find the station commander standing there, posture stiff, expression caught between gratitude and suspicion. You are Torrin Vale, the commander said. Torrin sighed. I was hoping to deny that. You assisted Her Majesty during her absence. I helped a surveyor not die in a wreck, Torrin replied. Titles came later. The commander studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Your salvage claim has been expedited. Fees waived. Torrin blinked. All of them? Yes. He stared. I should help queens more often. The commander almost smiled, then remembered himself and walked away. Torrin collected his payment with a dazed sense of disbelief. The credit transfer chimed on his wrist console, a number larger than he was used to seeing attached to his name. Enough to repair his ship properly, enough to leave this orbit, enough to make choices. That realization unsettled him more than the soldiers had. He returned to his ship, the familiar mess of patched panels and mismatched lighting, greeting him like an old friend who smelled faintly of ozone. The bunk still sagged. The console still flickered if you touched it wrong. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt slightly out of place, as if the ship were waiting for him to explain where he'd been. He powered up the engines and eased away from the station, letting the graveyard drift back into view. The dead world below watched silently, indifferent as ever. Torrin found himself scanning the debris field, half expecting to see Liz floating there again, waving him over with a comment about inefficient tool placement. Don't do that, he told himself. She's busy running an empire. The ship's comm crackled. Torrin Vale, a voice said. He jumped. I swear, if this is another fee, this is a secure channel, the voice continued, calm and precise, familiar. Torrin froze. Liz. A pause, then, softly. Elisara, when it matters. Liz, when it doesn't. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. You know, most people wait at least a day before haunting someone. I wanted to be certain you left safely, she said, and to apologize. For what? He asked. For not telling you sooner. He considered that. I might have bowed, would have ruined everything. There was a quiet sound on the line that might have been laughter. That is exactly why I didn't. They spoke for a while then, about small things. The nav core already being analyzed. The court already arguing. The station already turning her disappearance into rumor and myth. Torrin complained about his ship's left thruster. Elisara listened. You could come to the Reach, she said eventually. There would be work, not as a scavenger. Torrin smiled, though she couldn't see it. I don't think I'd last a week. Perhaps, she said, but you would last longer than most. He thought of polished floors, of people kneeling, of words that weighed more than they should. Then he thought of wreckage, of honest danger, of laughter echoing through broken corridors. Maybe someday, he said. Maybe, she agreed. The channel closed gently, without ceremony. Torrin sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of his ship, watching the stars slide past. He set a course. Not far, not ambitious, just forward. As the engines engaged, he felt lighter, as if something unspoken had settled into place. He was still a scavenger. She was still a queen. But somewhere in the vast, indifferent dark between stars, they had shared a moment where none of that mattered. And for Torrin Vale, that felt like a kind of wealth no empire could tax. The message arrived 3 weeks later, precisely when Torrin had convinced himself that his life had returned to its proper level of chaos. He was elbow deep in a faulty coolant line, arguing with a wrench that refused to cooperate, when his console chimed with a priority signal that carried enough encryption to make his ship briefly consider locking him out of his own systems. Great, Torrin muttered. Either I'm rich again or in serious trouble. He wiped his hands, smearing grease across his sleeve, and opened the channel. Elysra's image formed above the console, clear and composed. She wore formal attire now, elegant, structured, unmistakably royal, yet her long ears were unadorned, and her expression held a familiarity that cut through the ceremony like a hidden access hatch. Torrin Vale, she said. You are late. He glanced at the chrono. In my defense, I didn't know I was expected. That is usually how summons work, she replied. Then after a fraction of a second, this is a joke. I am practicing. He laughed, surprised by how easily it came. You're doing great. Terrifyingly formal, though. I will take that as progress, she explained without flourish. The nav core they had recovered had revealed more than trade routes. It contained evidence, old, buried, inconvenient, of how certain factions within her court had manipulated conflicts for personal gain. The same intrigue she had fled was now exposed, unraveling carefully arranged lies. There had been arrests, resignations, a great deal of shouting. I survived, she said dryly, which feels worth noting. I'm glad, Torrin said, and meant more than the word carried. I wanted you to hear it from me, Elysra continued, and I wanted to thank you again, not as a queen. Ah, he said, as a surveyor, as a person. The silence that followed was comfortable, not heavy. Torrin leaned back in his chair, noticing how different that felt from weeks ago. He had repaired his ship properly, paid his debts, turned down 2 salvage jobs he didn't want simply because he could. The universe hadn't changed, but his footing in it had. I didn't bow, he said suddenly. I noticed, she replied. It caused 3 senior advisors to argue for an entire afternoon. Happy to help. She studied him through the projection, her gaze thoughtful. You changed my course, Torrin Vale. You reminded me that power is lighter when it is not constantly admired. He scratched his jaw. You reminded me that running from trouble doesn't mean it won't find you. Sometimes it just waits until you're holding something expensive. That earned him a soft laugh. If you ever wish to visit the Reach, she said, you will be welcome. Not as a subject, not as an employee, as yourself. He considered the offer. Once he would have dismissed it with a joke and never looked back. Now he allowed himself to imagine it. Bright halls, sharp minds, conversations where words mattered as much as actions. Someday, he said, when my ship stops falling apart out of spite, I will hold you to that. The channel closed, leaving the quiet hum of the ship behind. Torrin sat there for a while, hands folded, thinking about dead worlds and living ones, about crowns and corridors filled with wreckage. He realized he no longer felt small when thinking of either. Later, he took a salvage contract near the edge of map space, not because he needed the credits, but because he wanted the work. As his ship slipped into drift, stars stretching around him, Torrin smiled to himself. He had met a queen and learned she was a woman who wanted to breathe. He had met himself and learned he could choose more than survival. The universe was still vast, still dangerous, still unfair, but it felt a little more open now. And for the first time in a long while, Torrin Vale wasn't just moving forward to escape the past. He was moving forward because he wanted to see what came next.